Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
At 10 o'clock, the cameras would be turned on in the condemned inmate cell, and the staff would start their process of inserting shunts in the arms.
BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams with the Why Factor. Today, the death penalty. Why does it persist?
Once that was completed, the inmate would then be led into the execution chamber where he would lay down on the table. The restraints, which were like lap belts, would be placed across the legs and the chest and on the wrist. A member would come in and hook up the IV lines.
Terry Collins has overseen the killing of 33 men in America, executions by lethal injection. He spent more than 3 decades in the prison service in Ohio, one of 32 states in the USA which still have the death penalty.
Then the warden, who stays in the room, and one other person who stays in the room, would ask the condemned if they had a last statement. That statement would be given, and once that statement was given, then the drugs would be started. And most cases, if you started at 10, you were done by 10:20, 10:25.
And what emotions did you experience during these many, many executions?
You know, I never really thought about it, and I think maybe my way of dealing with it was to suppress those feelings.
So you felt nothing?
I mean, I didn't lose any sleep. It wasn't what I would say on my mind all the time. I mean, I always asked myself the question when I took that 40-minute drive every morning to Lucasville when we were doing execution, did the state get it right? Because there has been individuals in this state, in fact, there's been 9 individuals in this state who have been on death row and been released, later to be found not guilty, not only in this state but across the country in the hundreds. So I always questioned was, did the system get it correct?
I'm Audrey Cochran. I'm the Director of Global Issues at Amnesty International's International Secretariat. Hanging is probably the most common form of execution. Lethal injection is obviously used in countries like the United States. Beheading is used in some countries like Saudi Arabia, and firing squad is used in some countries. But hanging is probably the most common method of execution.
Which countries carry out the most executions?
Every year it's the same country, it's China. China carries out thousands of executions every year. It's very hard to confirm exact figures because it's a state secret in China. The government doesn't publish numbers. So that's definitely the top executioner in the world. Then we have countries like Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United States who are often in the top 5 executioners in any given year.
Is the latest year consistent with previous years? What's the trend?
The trend overall is a reduction in the use of the death penalty, and there's always within that some bumps on the roads. In 2013 we saw a spike in executions mainly in Iraq and Iran. We haven't seen quite the same spike this year, although obviously the situation in Iran makes it difficult to actually get a firm figure. But the same executioners are in sort of the top 10 every year.
A day came, 5 of us were dragged out of the cell to the gallows to be hanged.
Thank God Evos from Nigeria was an armed robber, convicted and sentenced to death by a military court in a country then under military rule. He told me his story, told me how he came within seconds of being hanged for his crime.
That is 2013, June 24th. At about 12 noon,
At the gallows, a Christian pastor anointed the 5 condemned men with olive oil and prayed that God would receive their souls. Then he left, and the executions began.
So the first one, after his warrant was read to him, his legs and hand and his head had been covered with a black cap. Second one, third one, fourth one.
Did you have to watch the 4 previous executions?
I watched all in the same room. A doctor confirmed each and every one of them dead before they were loosed and wrapped with a blanket till it got to my turn. The sheriff looked. He said, that my sentence was confirmed in the year 1997 And the protocol is that I should be executed publicly by the military firing squad.
The prison authorities were about to hang him when they realised the military court had ruled he should be shot in public. And though the gallows were ready, a firing squad was not.
The prison authority doesn't want to open the gallows door. The law said anybody that is enter into the gallows door and the door is being locked, that person doesn't come out alive. So I should be hanged. Then the sheriff said no, that I'm not for him.
He was lucky. Nigeria's flawed judicial system made an embarrassing mistake and bowed to international pressure from human rights organisations. He was reprieved and in October last year, thank God, was released from prison after nearly 20 years on death row.
It's in some ways a simple thing for politicians in some countries to say we're being tough on crime, we're executing people, when actually to really combat the insecurity and criminal problems, they need a proper functioning justice system that doesn't resort to human rights violations.
The death penalty is popular among the public in a great many of the states that use it.
It is popular, but it's popular because it's portrayed as a solution to a problem, violent crime or insecurity. And the fact is, it isn't a solution to that problem. And the data shows it isn't a solution to that problem, or at least no more of a solution than effective detection of crime and prison sentences would be.
Have all the men that have died in the electric chair, in the gas chamber, by lethal injection in the United States, have they all been guilty of their crimes?
I can only assume they have been. Working in prison for 32 and a half years, many people told me they were not guilty. It wasn't my decision to determine their guilt or innocence. My decision was that the court said you were, therefore you're with me, and my responsibility is to hold you until the courts or the system says it's time for you to leave. I don't believe that anyone that was executed during my time in witnessing and being involved in that process, I don't have any reason to believe. Nobody never said in their last statement they weren't guilty. But odds being what they are, across the country, I would have to say that there probably was. I mean, we're talking 100 and some people the last time I checked that across this nation had been found to be not guilty after serving multiple years on death row.
The US is slowly moving away from the death penalty.
Professor Carolyn Hoyle, Director of the Centre for Criminology at Oxford University.
If you take the figures from the last full year, i.e. 2014, they had just 35 executions in the US. That's the fewest since 1994. And only 72 death sentences, which is actually the lowest in the last 40 years. So it really is declining in its use. And public opinion is also shifting, largely for factors around costs. It's seen that the death penalty is so much more expensive than its alternative of life sentences. Botched executions have really changed public opinion. The innocence movement, showing that innocent people are executed. But also a very significant factor in America is the availability of life without the prospect of parole.
In the United States, it's actually cheaper to keep someone in jail for life than it is to execute them. It avoids decades of expensive legal appeals against the death sentence. But still, it continues.
I think the death penalty persists because people are frightened. People are frightened of other people who do bad things, really bad things, murder in particular, and they don't know what to do about it.
Joanna Burke is Professor of History at Birkbeck, University of London.
I actually think that it is about a ritual of sacrifice, sacrificing these people that we don't know what to do with. It is a cleansing of society, but it's a really quite brutal cleansing of society, which is why I think thinking about the death penalty as a kind of sacrifice is an interesting way, a good way to do it, because it is cleansing society through yet another bloodbath. One of the big shifts between the 19th century and the 20th and 21st century is the professionalization of executioners. The executioners in the earlier period were amateurs, whereas the closer you get to the 20th century, and then, of course, definitely by the 20th century, actually the people carrying out executions are extremely skilled technicians. They are medical personnel who know how to give injections, who understand the pharmacology of the whole process. So it's a very, very different kind of process, and it's one that explicitly is intended to make it easier for the executioner, who can sort of have this idea that it is simply another medical procedure, and they can maintain the kind of myth that it's probably the most painless way to go.
Do you have any regrets about the part that you played in the execution of these men?
Absolutely not.
Yet you've changed your mind about the merits of the death penalty.
I've changed my mind because I believe the system should be fair. I believe the system should be equal for all parties. My mind didn't change because I thought it was inhumane or cruel or unusual. My mind was changed because it's been proven that your race, your county of arrest, your economic status can determine whether or not you end up on death row. I don't believe that that's fair.
So if you could eliminate those biases, you would be content to see the death penalty continue in your state and across your country?
No, I believe that the death penalty in this state should be abolished. I don't believe we need the death penalty. I believe that life without parole is a sufficient punishment, and I have no problem with someone being in prison for a number of years. But I do have a problem with the death penalty because there is an alternative.
And yet you will not look back on the 33 deaths that you've witnessed with anything other than professional pride, it seems.
Well, I wouldn't say it's professional pride, but I was proud of my profession for 32 and a half years. I fulfilled my job to the fullest that I could each and every day for the 32 and a half years. So, yeah, I had pride in what I did because I carried out the law of this state. That's not boastful. That's not being egotistical. I prided myself in trying to ensure that I and the people that I supervised did the best we could do every day.
States justify the death penalty on the basis of combating terrorism, insecurity and violent crime, even though there's absolutely no evidence to support the view that the death penalty is more of a deterrent than a prison sentence. That's how states use it or justify it, and we're trying very hard to combat that.
Is it not obvious that a death penalty would be more of a deterrent?
Well, first of all, no, there have been studies and it's never been shown to be more of a deterrent. And in some of the countries that use this as a justification, actually the problem is if you commit a crime, you're unlikely to get caught. It's the detection process that's actually quite flawed.
Audrey Gochran from Amnesty International argues that the death penalty is no deterrent to crime. Thank God Evos goes further, saying he believes it can actually lead to greater violence.
In the death row, I've seen people who did not commit offense. They have been condemned to death. They were hanged because the system of justice is imperfect.
If the system of justice was better in Nigeria, if it was more transparent, if there was no corruption, would you accept the death penalty for those found guilty? Would you accept that society has a right to remove them from society?
No man has a right to take another man's life in whatever way. Condemning criminals to death never solve the problem. When criminals know when they are caught, they are going to be executed, they kill their victim.
They kill their victim because they know they don't want the witness.
They can give somebody life imprisonment. It's not an easy thing, especially here in Nigeria.
Let's talk about the crimes that draw the death penalty. Murder, of course,
Yes.
and what?
It's also used in some countries, especially in the Middle East and North Africa, for crimes, or I say crimes in inverted commas, such as apostasy, sexual offences, or even sexual behaviours that in most countries would not be considered to be an offence. And in countries like China, it's used for many different offences. They have been trying to progressively restrict the use of the death penalty. In the last few years, they have taken it off the books for 13 economic crimes, but it still remains on the books for other more serious financial offences. If you take a lot of the Asian jurisdictions that use the death penalty a lot of that is for drug trafficking. And there is a problem with drug trafficking in a lot of those countries. So it's not even that you have to harm somebody, let alone kill somebody in some countries to get the death penalty.
An execution is ultimately a political act, a reaction to events, a new government, a new policy, a new president, a new mood. For 7 years, Pakistan halted all executions, but after a Taliban attack on a school which killed 141 children and 9 adults, executions resumed for those convicted of terrorism offences. And just this month, the government announced that executions could go ahead for all death penalty offences. And in Indonesia 9 years ago, 2 Australians were sentenced to death by firing squad for plotting to smuggle drugs. Last year, a new president was elected, Joko Widodo, and very quickly he said he would not approve any clemencies for drug offences.
The president is adamant that those who are found guilty by the court has to face up with the sentence by the court.
Hikmahanto Juwana, a professor of international law at the University of Indonesia.
The president is saying that there's no room for the 2 to escape from the execution.
And why is the president so adamant that they must be executed? What's happened? What's changed?
First of all, Indonesia, according to the president, is facing the state of emergency over drugs. Secondly, because the aspiration of people in Indonesia, they wanted Indonesia to be free from drugs.
The idea that in Indonesia the death penalty is popular for those who smuggle drugs must be tempting for a politician. Popularity is something that they crave.
I don't think that the intention is to get popularity, because I don't think any politicians, including in Indonesia, will play around with people's life. But politicians, when they are elected by the people, they have to carry out their promise. And one of the promise of the president to our public is he wants to get very tough on the issue of drug smuggling.
So you think these men have to die?
I'm afraid so, because the court has stated so.
It's the law.
It is the law.
Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that everyone has the right to life. But across the world, more than 4 billion people live in countries which retain the death penalty. It is a fact of life for more than half the population of the planet. Decapitation and stoning, electrocution and firing squad, the gas chamber, the gallows, and lethal injection.
I believe that they were humane. We did have one execution that we stopped. They had attempted multiple times to insert the catheters in the arm. The veins, I think they used the word brittle, and they couldn't get a vein to hold.
And what ultimately happened to that man?
He still sits on death row in this state.
Still?
Yes.
And he still sits there on death row now, waiting for what? Waiting to be well enough to die?
Well, I wouldn't use the term well enough, but yes, he still remains on death row, and I assume at some point in time they'll move forward unless the death penalty in the state is abolished.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.